after d4, Magnus played e6, offering a French defense, and Karjakin's like, all right. And Yasser really likes this line for black. He said, there's no way you can ever lose this endgame. Okay, and then Jennifer was like, why do you like this line for black? And he said, because white's only plan is f5 or c4. Black easily prevents that, but black plays g5 and destroys this, so it's better to have black. All right. Now, there's more funny stuff going on. In this position, everybody plays knight b5 and then eventually puts their knight on d4. Now, you remember what Yasser said. And Karjakin played a move Yasser wasn't familiar with and thought it was stupid. Played h4. Well, that stops Yasser's g5. But the problem is we can't get our knight to d4 anymore because of bishop d7. Now, if you play knight b5, I take it. And then there's no knight going to sit on d4. So now he played h5. And Yasser was like, what's white doing? This white's not putting his knight on d4. Now Yasser correctly pointed out, if you play knight e2 to d4, bishop b5 comes. And then if knight d4, we trade our bad bishop for your good bishop. So Karjakin played bishop d3. He's going to play knight e2 to d4. Now to me, it seems like Karjakin was listening to Yasser. He was like, I want to play f5, I want to play knight d4, and I want to stop g5. Well, he did all of that. And Yasser was like, this is great for black. I wish I had black. Magnus is black. Black's going to win. I love black, etc. Okay, orange is the new black. Okay, so he played a6, and Yasser loved that move. And the reason is, if you play knight e2 to d4, before you play knight d4, I play bishop b5 again and trade my bad bishop. So he loved that move. Okay, rook h3, makes sense. Getting his rook active. Knight a4, he thought that was fine. And now Yasser was furious. He had great engines and furious anger. And I'm looking at the engine, and the engine plays Magnus's move. Yasser was sure that Magnus would play bishop b5 now that he has the chance, because there's no knight on c3, and the knight hasn't gone to d4 yet. Well, what's funny is the engine doesn't even give bishop b5 as a move. It says that's terrible. The problem is we just take it, and then we can try to win this pawn later, since we have rook b3 and knight d4, and we can switch from doing this. As Public Enemy would say, most of them would rather switch than fight. Man, nobody's going to get that. God damn. Even Public Enemy wouldn't get it. They'd be like, what? That's in our song? Okay. Yeah, fight the power. So, yeah, the engine's like rook here, and double up on the bubble up, and triple up, and black's lost. So the engine doesn't like that for concrete reasons. Okay, so Magnus played knight c5. Now I have to let you know the whole game so far, the engine's like, yay, white's doing great. And Yasser's like, black's doing great. Okay, so he just likes the French for black. He likes these positions. He doesn't think white has any advantage. The engine doesn't agree. The engine's like, white's doing great. Knight d4, guys, knight to d4. He stopped the h5, the g5. Great. Okay, rook here, rook here. Now, here's the problem black has. If he plays rook g8 defending his pawn, then bishop h7, and then I take on g7. But Magnus correctly evaluated you can still do that. And the reason is, after bishop h7, if you take, then king f8, and these pieces are all trapped. So white's lost. Of course, white could take a draw if he wants, but doesn't want to draw. And instead, he plays a very interesting move, not engine recommended. King d2, not a bad move, but he's getting off of this. He's walking his king up the board. He's doing the walk of life. And black doesn't have a lot of counterplay. Okay? So I don't really agree with Yasser's evaluation of this game that black was just doing great. Great opening, great middle game. What the heck is Karjakin doing? And then Magnus played a terrible game and lost. That's not what happened. Now here, Magnus made a bad move, and they were like, wow, this is the greatest move ever. Now, obviously, if you're analyzing a Blitz game live without an engine, you know, they're not as good as the players. So you got to have Maurice's engine and, hope that you're right. So here he played bishop b5. Very interesting tactical move. It doesn't work, but it's interesting. The idea is I want to play knight e4 check, so this isn't really hanging, if you know what I mean. He's trying to punish him for playing king d2. But Karjakin ignored that and played f5. So I was thinking, when I was watching the game live, everything Yasser said, black wants to play g5, white wants to play f5. So, well, black's never going to play g5, and white did play f5. But Yasser still liked black. I just didn't know why. Like, everybody did everything Yasser said. White got his stuff in and black didn't. So why shouldn't white be better? White's knight is on d4. It's a pretty good knight. Okay, so he played bishop d7. They didn't like that move. Bishop back. Okay. Took, bishop takes. This is all good. King e3, reasonable. The engine still says white's better. White's obviously better. I'm on this pawn here defending it. Ugh, horrible. And this knight's, a pretty good knight. Okay, knight d7, attacking the e-pawn. Good, good. And now, if you remember that stuff I was showing you, you obviously don't. Remember when I said bishop here and rook here and king here attacks the rook? That doesn't work for black anymore. Luckily, black doesn't need it, but it doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is if you play king f8, this move wins. Okay, and then if you take the knight. But that's okay. Magnus didn't need that. Magnus took on e5. Okay, reasonable. And the engine says like it's equal and white's a little better, but it should be a draw. Okay. And the engine actually doesn't like that white took this pawn and gave up his e-pawn. Yeah, all right. Rook f1, very reasonable. And if you play knight c4 and start hunting for pawns, you're going to get in trouble on f7 and e6. You need your knight here to defend. Okay. Another idea is he wants to take the bishop, king takes, bishop f5 check, skewering the king and rook. So Karjakin's got some ideas. The best move is bishop d7, stopping all that stuff I just said. But Magnus played rook e8, confusing the audience. This game was played earlier today. Knight takes e6, you have to take with the king, and then king d4. So black has all these isolated pawns. White's rooks are excellent. White's bishop is pretty good. And here comes the white king. Okay, so white has a nice advantage. The commentators thought it was about equal. Okay, king d6. Stopping the white king from coming in and activating the rook. Very reasonable. Bishop d3, reasonable. Knight c6, good. King c3. Got to defend this pawn, so knight e5. King d4. And now the commentators were incorrectly claiming that Karjakin wanted to draw and that Magnus didn't do the draw. Karjakin wasn't going to play king d4 again. He's just repeating because you always repeat. That's the way you play chess, is you always repeat. So Magnus didn't repeat. He's not falling for that. Bishop f5 is a weird move. The best move is b3 because we stop the knight from coming to c4 and we stop a rook from coming to c4. We defend c4. And he played bishop f5, which is a weird move because of rook f6. So he's pinning his own bishop. Okay, he went back, realizing his mistake. King e3, which is weird. Okay, and this should be a draw. White's a little bit better, but it should be a draw. Okay, now Magnus made a bad move. The kind of move you just play because you have no time on your clock. Knight e5 attacking the rook. The rook went to b4, which it couldn't go to before. And then rook e7 is also not good. And now both players missed, rook b6 check, which gives white a big advantage. And Yasser was like, rook b6 check. Roar, I'm mad. And instead he played king f4, which is not as good. And here, black should definitely play b5 and ensconce that rook. Make sure that rook can't do Vishwa nothing. Okay? But instead he played knight c6. rook b6. And here the commentators felt this rook was going to get trapped, so that black was better. Now again, just like you guys at home, the commentators have a psychological problem. Psychological problem is Magnus is always the highest rated player in the world. Magnus is always the world champion. Magnus never loses. So when something is tricky and they're not sure who it's good for, they just assume it's Magnus. Oh, it's good for Magnus. And then Magnus always wins, and they're right. But Magnus isn't playing well this tournament. He's not in good form. So when things are tricky, he's usually wrong this tournament, not having a good tournament. So they were like, oh man, that rook's trapped and white's in a lot of trouble. No. White's got 2-1 and black has no counterplay. Black can't do anything. Okay. The engine wants to play a4 to cement the rook in some more, but he played g4. Okay, fine. And king c5 attacking the rook. Rook here. And now Yesser got really mad, and rightfully so. What he doesn't realize is this is already really bad for black because, man, this is a tough pawn. And he was furious at what Magnus did here. The engine says it's fine. He wanted Magnus to play d4 to trap the rook. Okay, but I mean, man, this is a pretty strong pawn over here. Okay, instead he played knight d4, forcing the white rook to go to the back rank and crush black. So he was like, that was dumb. Yeah. Rook e1, not quick enough. Yeah. And again, these games that Magnus is losing this tournament, they remind me of games that he wins. Like, white has a better king, white has a better minor piece, black has 3 isolated pawns, and white has 0. It's like Magnus is playing white. These are the games he always wins. So, tough town. Okay, and then, I mean, white was just winning because this passed pawn's too good. Yeah. And the truth hurts. Now here, they thought that Karjakin went crazy, but actually this was good technique. Because white's going to do this. And the way black stopped it was to play f5, which blocks the bishop. But this is hopeless. The knight can't do anything. My king's coming in here. If you push your pawn, your undefending h7's not blocked. So the engine says like plus 1,000 for white. And it wasn't too hard. He won pretty easily. And the end of the game was very nice. He played king c5 and then king d4, stopping the black king from coming in, and the knight's trapped. So we just play c4, king c3, and take the knight. And you'll notice this is the right colored rook pawn. So there's no tricks. Yeah, so here he resigned. My engine says plus 153.